right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
So just a quick information about Huron. Huron is a global consulting company. We help our clients solve big problems across 6 industries. But what we're going to talk about today is how we used an enterprise-wide innovation challenge to change our managed services through digital transformation and really reshape how we help our clients open clinical trials. So before I get into the solution, I want to talk about what a clinical trial is. So I'm going to ask you to think back to June 2020. So we're in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and at the time, an average of 1,000 Americans are dying a day. We're in desperate need for a vaccine, and on average, it takes 220 days to open a clinical trial. And in order to get to a vaccine, we have to open a clinical trial. So even our industry standard of 90 days is a long time in the face of this, of real life-impacting crisis. So when this innovation challenge presented as an opportunity, it made sense to me that we would focus on an area that would help us open clinical trials faster. So I lead a team who help healthcare companies across the nation open clinical trials. The areas that are highlighted in green, these are the areas that we focus our efforts. And we decided that coverage analysis was a perfect place to start a concept of a digital transformation. So why is coverage analysis a good place to start? Well, quite simply, because it's hard. So a coverage analysis is something that I like to think of as the merging of 2 worlds. So on one hand, you have the science side, where the language of that world is science, is protocol methodology and a lot of scientific jargon. And on the other side, you have patient clinical care and patient billing. And to do a coverage analysis, the person has to be able to speak both of these languages, as well as be able to understand clinical application and clinical guidelines. So you essentially have to have 3 degrees to do one job. And I'm not going to go through the how a bill becomes a law version of a coverage analysis, but I will say that what makes the coverage analysis a good candidate for a digital transformation project is that it is repetitive, it is difficult, it has a very intense decision tree process, and it is crucial to this overall process of opening a clinical trial. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our digital partners that helped me bring my innovation challenge idea to reality.
Thank you, Heather. Yes, so to summarize the journey here and what we were trying to accomplish, we had to query complex documents containing structured information and unstructured text stored in a range of formats. We had to ask those documents a collection of difficult questions, as we mentioned on the last slide, which take real expertise both to pose and to interpret. And then we had to report the results in a format which could be shared and perhaps interrogated in a roll-up form or on an instance-by-instance basis. Heather has been working to optimize and improve this output for many years with manual tools, macros, as she mentioned, decision trees and white papers and so on. But before the advent of Gen AI or AI innovation, it could be summarized as just do the work, because ultimately it was a manual process done by experts. It was difficult. It required ongoing training as the regulations were adjusted and the team rotated. It required very diligent and skilled execution. And it had an unfortunate ratio of menial admin tasks to very complex decisions and interpretation. So it's a clear contender for the AI technologies that we're learning about at the conference this week. This innovation challenge was an internal opportunity. The audience for the product we were going to build was finite, and that put a limit on the budget and the amount of effort we could invest. This was not something we were going to launch externally. So to work within those parameters, we had to design the solution carefully. I should mention also that we do not, at the time, have a deep team of AI experts, so we had to use certain technologies, again, the kinds we see out there on the floor, in order to get this thing done. We couldn't build this from the ground up. So we elected some third-party tools. We built on a platform that we knew would evolve and keep with the times. And we built a solution that the management team would then be able to inherit and maintain themselves. This was important because I think we've been part of internal operations where something is built and then delivered, but then not maintained, leaving the owner with a problem where they want to extend it, but without a team to do so. So let's look at what we built here. On the top flow is the back-end ingestion process, which is familiar to some of you who have worked with this RAG or option here. We selected Amazon Bedrock Knowledge, which was relatively simple at the time in terms of its feature set, but evolved rapidly with us over the last couple of years as our requirement evolved. Introducing things such as customized chunking strategies, importantly, the introduction of filters, and custom code hooks on ingestion. The filters in particular are important. These allow us to have a single instance in Amazon Bedrock, but when the question is then asked, to only retrieve the information from one or two of the documents within that knowledge base. We cannot be asking a question and having the answer come back from documents that were not part of this specific clinical trial. And that's what the filters allowed you to do within the Amazon Bedrock solution. That's a classic workflow, and it's well documented. The interesting piece on the bottom here was how to get the information out and then present it. We first started off with the chat UI. We're all familiar with the experience now of talking to your documents. But that would have required Heather's team to memorize and then type out substantial and complex questions and prompts in order to get the information she wanted. So we clearly needed a prompt library of some kind. And again, within the Bedrock framework, there now is a prompt library. There was not at the time. But even had that been available, we would have had to build a UI and a UX in order to manage those prompts, because we wanted it to be something that the management team could self-service. So rather than go with that route, we chose Smartsheets as the front end for this. Smartsheets is an online version of a spreadsheet familiar to anybody here, such as Google Sheets or Office 365 Excel. But Smartsheets is just another product in that area. But it has some very specific advantages for us. It allows Heather to define templates, which then can be instantiated to become a clinical review. And then from those templates, which have the formatting and the questions embedded within them, that can now be tailored by the specialist who wants to tune them up for this particular review, using a UI they're very familiar with, which is the spreadsheet UI. They can attach a file to that spreadsheet or that Smartsheet. That file or files become the things that are interrogated, and then the answers are pushed back next to the questions right there in line. When you hit save, the webhook fires the API, which does the request and brings the information back, populating the column in the Smartsheet right next to the question. And it is a general purpose tool, which Heather, you're already thinking about using more broadly. So those are how we attended to the problem. And I'm going to hand it over now to Clara to talk about what we learned in the process and how we optimized on that.
Hello. Thank you, Rob. As we begin testing the solution, we realized that there are different types of research protocols that we have to handle. And we encounter a big challenge, the data. It is one of the critical data that is housed in something called a schedule of activities. A schedule of activities is a complex table detailing every step of a clinical trial. It may include information such as screening activities, treatments, procedures, and follow-ups. Each of these schedule of activities is unique to its clinical trial. During our tests, we realized that 65% of these tables were different. In a way that the format is different, the structure is different. It's like the blueprint of a building, providing steps of a building a constructions. So if we misinterpret any steps, it will compromise the whole structure. So it's a clinical trial for the patients. Let's take a look at this example here. This is an example of the schedule of activities. In here, as you can see that there are procedures listed and there are time period indicated. In there, you can divide it into cycles as well as specific days for the cycles. And X indicates a procedure is needed. And clinical professions can visually comprehend this table and understand what procedure is needed when. For us, our challenge is that we need to comprehend or parse this table in a way that LLM would understand. Our next challenge that we have encountered is about decision making. Coverage analysis involves making a significant number of decisions. And for each procedure and at any time point, we need to accurately determine the billing destination. To give you a sense of an idea of the scale, a particular procedure that, I'm not there yet. A particular procedure may have 50 different steps as well as 10 time points. And we might need to answer 4 different questions. This adds up to 2,000 decisions that an analyst have to make for a single research protocol. So how do we interpret complex tables as well as navigating through thousands of decisions? As you can see here in the updated architecture, we are able to make some enhancements to improve the challenges, to address the challenges. So to address the complexity of the schedule of activities, we realized that we need a more sophisticated and more advanced parser, a document parser. A parser that would need to comprehend or capture the whole table as a whole and preserve the integrity of the table as well as the data related to it. And how do we do that? There are a lot of information in the table that we need to compress or collapse the grid that you saw earlier into information in 2 dimensions so that LLM can understand. We were able to evaluate a number of parsers, services, and technologies in the market. But ultimately, we decided to build our own, solely because the interpretation of the schedule is very specific, as well as each of them is highly unique. Next, let's talk about the decision-making challenge. Clinical trials involves navigating complex dependencies across steps. Each decision influences others. Therefore, it is critical to ensure that we are employing a context-aware reasoning across the processes. AI agents is capable of doing simulating reasoning as well as making data-driven decisions. So we started to implement an AI agent framework. And this particular framework allows us to break down the problem into smaller, manageable components. And these components are basically specific agents working collaboratively to handle specific tasks within the analysis. And furthermore, the agents can further specialize in a particular domain, such as understanding a patient's medical history, as well as understanding their conditions, baseline conditions, as an example, because each of these domains are very specific. You need to ask very specific questions accordingly. And the whole purpose of this, it's basically to improve accuracy as well as consistency for the analysis. So while we are actively working to implement these solutions and enhancements, our team, end user, are already seeing great benefits of the solutions that we have bring. Our research office team, Heather's team, it highlights the increased dependency, increased efficiencies that this particular solution brings. For example, it will streamline documentation workflows, as well as they're now spending less time on repetitive tasks. However, they're also emphasizing the improved accuracy. Right now, they are able to this solution enables them to proactively identify alternate procedure, meaning that they don't need to redo minimize the need to redo the analysis. So all these results have encouraged us to continue improving the solution, not only for the team, but for to support clinical trials that the patients depend on. As we continue evolve and also innovate to the solution with the solutions that we have, we are looking forward to learn more about the technologies and best practices out there. So with that, this concludes our talk. Thank you very much for your time. We would love to meet you for any Q&A out there, or please connect us through LinkedIn. Huron Consulting. Thank you.